How's it going, everyone? It has been Lone Vault Wanderer here with a Borderlands 3 discussion video, but before we get started, as always, I would love if you followed and supported me on Twitch, the link to which is in the description below, as is the link to my Discord, and I would love if you joined there. So, I want to talk about Borderlands 3 and discuss whether we, as a community, would like to see a separate dedicated PvP mode incorporated into the new game. Because as we know, Borderlands has never really had a PvP mode like other games, for example, the upcoming Star Wars Battlefront 2 or Destiny or games like that. While it's had small kind of pockets or aspects of PvP such as dueling or the arenas in Borderlands 1, we've never really had that kind of dedicated mode. And even in the moments that we do have PvP in the traditional sense, it's really unbalanced and it just doesn't work, right? But obviously the question would be, if Gearbox can get the balancing right, can get all of that sorted out, would there be value in having a PvP mode in Borderlands 3? Would fans want to see a PvP mode on top of your regular PvE mode in Borderlands 3? So I want to get my thoughts out there. Of course, I would encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. This is a discussion, it's a conversation after all, but let's get into what I think. At this stage, I think there are a lot of other PvP games out there, right? And I just mentioned a few. Your Call of Duties, your Battlefields, your Destinies, your Star Wars Battlefronts. Those kinds of games, they're out there, they're dominating the market. Especially with that context in mind, I don't really want to see Borderlands 3 try out a PvP mode. And I think the first major reason for that is that I don't think it needs it. I mean, it does what it does so well in just playing with friends, playing with 3 other people or up to 3 other people, just exploring the environment, doing quests, shooting enemies, all those kinds of things. Borderlands has just been a series that has done what it does really well, in my opinion. Obviously, Borderlands 1 was not as good as Borderlands 2, but that game, Borderlands 2, did a great job in terms of PvE and questing and playing with mates. So with that traditional mode there, as fun as a PvP mode might sound for Borderlands, again, if it was balanced, I still don't see the desire or need for me personally to play that mode desperately. And maybe that's because I've kind of veered away from dedicated multiplayer competitive games in recent times. Some people love their multiplayer competitive shooters, and that's fine too, but for me personally, I'm fine with Borderlands the way it is. Secondly as well, you know how development works. Unless Gearbox is looking to actually hire in more staff to work on a brand new mode, if they do decide to tack on a PvP mode to Borderlands 3, then that will mean taking off employees, developers, programmers, resources generally, off of working on Borderlands 3 in the traditional sense in terms of the PvE, etc., onto working onto the PvP mode. And I just don't want that. At this stage, Gearbox is really in the deep midst of Borderlands 3 development, and I just want to see them working on the core of the game that we've come to know and love. Again, my argument here is kind of premised on the fact that they don't hire more people to work on the PvP mode, but even then, I don't believe that's likely anyways. Like, if they decide to work on a PvP mode, I could see them trying to manage resources, shift people to working on that. Maybe they hire some independent contractors, but I don't see them bringing on like full-time employees just to work on the PvP mode, because that is a huge monetary financial risk, yeah? I mean, you're talking about, I don't even know what the going rate for a developer or a programmer is nowadays, but it's at least, what, 70 to 80 grand a year, if not $100,000 at a minimum, especially for experienced programmers and developers and artists and all of that in the field. I just don't see that happening, and if we assume that that's the case, that they don't hire people on, if they're taking away people from working on the core of Borderlands as we've come to know it, again, the PvE, then perhaps there's a chance that could undermine that traditional aspect of Borderlands 3. It could take away much needed resources from improving the game's quality, from adding to the world, from adding more quests, from adding more character dialogue. All of the things that come together to make a Borderlands game, if there are less people working on those aspects, it's likely not going to be as good. So I think we need to bear those things in mind. And also thirdly, my last argument on this point, Just because Borderlands is a first-person shooter, and theoretically on paper it could work well in a PvP scenario, I've never been a fan of traditionally single-player games. Yes, Borderlands is not traditionally single-player. You can play with your friends, but still, I still view it as a cooperative campaign nonetheless. There have been games in the past that have tacked on kind of multiplayer PvP modes that in my opinion just never really fit with the game. For instance, I never liked when Assassin's Creed went down the multiplayer route with Brotherhood, yeah? At that stage, I fell off the franchise because I just didn't believe multiplayer was needed, and I believe it took away from the core of the game. And then as it went, Ubisoft dropped multiplayer in Assassin's Creed. The exact same thing happened with BioShock 2. BioShock is a phenomenal single-player game, and then they added multiplayer in BioShock 2. And as much as I played it, just for the achievements, mind you, that doesn't mean it needed it. That doesn't mean that it fit well with the BioShock franchise. And maybe Assassin's Creed and BioShock and Borderlands aren't necessarily similar in that regard, to the extent that it's probably the case that Borderlands 3 would fit well with a PvP mode, because it's very much, you know, your traditional first-person shooter where you have your different guns and skills and abilities, and it could likely work well in a competitive scenario. I mean, again, we already have Borderlands games that have certain aspects of PvP. But even then, that has never really been what Borderlands has been about. The franchise, in my opinion, has been about great characters, crazy weapons, crazy looting, awesome abilities, and not necessarily having a balanced game. I mean, we know how unbalanced PvP currently is in Borderlands 1 and Borderlands 2. Certain characters just had those abilities and weapons where they could demolish other people whenever you tried to challenge people in a duel. And if you're going to strip back all of those aspects just to make the PvP mode balanced, will that undermine the identity of Borderlands? Is that going to take away a lot of what makes Borderlands so much fun in the first place? I really do think there's a risk there. So, to sum it up at this stage, no, I don't believe Borderlands 3 needs or should have a PvP mode. Let's just have Gearbox do what they've done with past games and work on making Borderlands 3 the best Borderlands game it could possibly be, as we've known to love the franchise. So anyways, Sanders, that is all from me. Of course, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you disagree with me, I would love to hear your competing points of view. And until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourself, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.